All right, we're back on the conversation. I got a question for you guys. You ever wonder what's in the bottled water that you drink? I wonder that all the time. I always think, like, do they really find some sort of mountain spring and set up a factory right underneath it? Or where do they get the water from? Well, good news. We're about to find out. Ryan Felton's an investigative reporter at Consumer Reports magazine, and he wrote about that, and particularly in these coronavirus times, the ramifications of that. So, Ryan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
No problem. All right, so let's start with the fun basics. So, Dasani, is that the Coke one or the Pepsi one?
Dasani's Coke and Pepsi is Aquafina.
Right. So, is it from some sort of Aquafina in the Swiss mountains, or where do they get the water?
Yeah, they primarily get their water for. I believe Coke does have some different sources, but for the most part, the vast majority of their water is supplied by your cities, your public water supplies, and that's there's big cities that are involved in play a role here, but there's some small towns as well. Kind of runs the gamut, but yeah, it's they're getting tap water more or less.
Already hilarious. Okay, and you wrote about the tap water they're getting from the bucolic, rural, gorgeous backwater town of Detroit. So these folks are getting. I mean, I don't know if folks know this, but Detroit's pretty close to Flint, Michigan, and so these folks. And not to say that there's anything wrong with that with the water, but. They're getting tap water from Detroit and selling it as Aquafina and Dasani, correct?
Yeah, they what the companies do, they get the tap water and then they filter it again and then resell it. But for the most part, I think what's sort of important to note is in order to actually use one of these systems, like as your source for bottled water, you have to show that tap water that you're getting already meets safe drinking water standards. So like, a city like Detroit, they have a system that is designed that's supposed to treat the water and is already, when it arrives at the plant, it's treated to meet safe drinking water standards. So I mean, in essence, you're supposed to be able to drink what already comes to the plant. But what the companies say is, the service we're providing is we're cleaning it again and packaging it up and selling it. But in a way, a lot of the consumer advocates and environmental law experts I spoke to, they kind of describe it as like a subsidy, more or less. Like the cities are in essence like providing the product to the companies at a relatively low cost. We found it to be about a penny per gallon. Once we looked at some of the billing records I got, it works out to about a penny per gallon. And then you can sell it at rates, 100, 150 times that wholesale. So I mean, it's lucrative is a word for it.
So yeah, to be fair to Coke and Pepsi, they do filter it again. But I read in your piece that it was about 133 times the what they pay for it. So that's a hell of a markup. And then to be fair again to Coke and Pepsi, they have other costs, right? They got to pay their employees, factory rent, etc. Still, it's a pretty sweet deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but now in this day and age with coronavirus causing huge problems for the average person, on top of it, it appears that they're getting disparate treatment. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. And I'm sure you're as you're familiar with the story that's kind of run a thread through the last several years is Detroit was kind of like considered the epicenter of water shutoffs several years ago, and it's continued practice that's continued to this day. So I mean, I was kind of just curious to see what exactly how these companies are treated. There was a question at the time Detroit filed for bankruptcy about whether or not residents and companies are both being treated fairly. And so no one had really kind of looked at this for a while, and I was just sort of curious. And what I found was that Coke and Pepsi had their billing records showed that they had been delinquent. Basically, the same sort of word that the city tosses around for residents who are unable to pay their bills. The city treats businesses and residents the same way. So if you are $150 behind on your bill and you haven't paid it in 60 days, whether you're a business or a resident, Detroit would say you're delinquent and you're at risk of a shutoff. But as everyone knows, residents would get shut off for having a couple $100s past due. But the billing records for Pepsi and Coke show that there's tens of thousands, six figures worth of past due balances that had gone unpaid at points. And they were never threatened with a shutoff. And I think that what was striking in a way about that is some of these residents who are getting their water shut off, they have to go get water someplace else. They might be going to the neighbor's house, they might be going to a relative's house and filling up water and bringing it back. Many are buying bottled water too. So in effect, you may be shutting off water to residents who are then turning around and buying bottled water. That bottled water may be the same tap water that they could be getting out of their home. And on top of it, Coke and Pepsi were delinquent at times, just like some of these residents were considered by the city of Detroit.
Gee, I wonder why people are deeply frustrated with big business and the politicians that they corrupt. Look at that story. So Pepsi or Coke could be hundreds of thousands of dollars delinquent, but they don't get their water shut off because they're big and powerful and will very likely donate to politicians. You, on the other hand, could have your water turned off for a tiny, tiny bill, and then you got to go buy the same tap water from Coke and Pepsi at 133x markup. Ah! So I know the answer to this, but I want the audience to know. They're not doing it in the middle of coronavirus, are they? They're not shutting off the water for people, because that would be insanity.
Yeah, the city announced a restart plan of sorts to get people reconnected who had their water shut off. But I think that was a point that we tried to make clear in the piece is, things about the thing to remember about the moratorium on water shutoffs is it's temporary. All these cities, these cities aren't coming out in droves saying we're not doing this anymore. Like cities like Detroit, they're going to by all accounts, they're planning to shut off water to residents again once the coronavirus pandemic has passed. And so, they have stopped, but it could very well happen again in the near future.
So Ryan, what do other cities do?
In terms of
like if somebody doesn't pay their water bill, Detroit shuts off their water under normal circumstances, and then good night, Irene. I don't know what the hell you're going to do if you don't have water. What do other cities do? Do they do the same thing or no?
Yeah, it's a common practice, and I think notably the most notable example that is the opposite of that is New York City says it does not shut off water to residents who are unable to pay their bills. Detroit has said that it needs that revenue to service the system, upkeep, that sort of thing. But there are other cities that have found ways to implement payment plans that are more focused on like what someone can pay. So it's like focused around like if you're someone who is low income and typically unable to pay and may go without paying their bills, there's cities like Philadelphia, Baltimore who have considered other plans that would say like, okay, you could pay a percentage of what you make. And the benefit there, they say, is the city's getting more revenue than they would have from this person. It's more than zero. And so that's a difference than what you would see in a place like Detroit.
Real quick, out of curiosity, is there an epidemic of not paying the water bills in those other cities?
I couldn't say.
Yeah, because the idea is that Detroit's saying like we're more draconian, So that'll teach people, and then they'll pay their water bill. My
Right.
guess is, and sorry, I'm throwing this at you. You didn't write about Philly and New York, etc. But my guess is probably about the same percentage of people don't pay their water bill in those places because about the same percentage of people are dealing with poverty. It's not because they're going, ha ha, now I don't have to pay the water bill.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, I think it just sort of kind of cycles back to about how, that we underscored in our reporting was how businesses are treated. If you have businesses that are racking up bills and you're not actively collecting them, these may be places that provide jobs and that sort of thing, but just sort of what sort of message does that convey to your constituents and people who need water every day? As the coronavirus pandemic has shown, people need water to protect themselves and to survive.
Hey, Ryan Felton, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Have a good night.
On the go? Don't worry, we got you covered. You can still listen to TYT at our new podcast network. Find us on Apple Podcasts, the Google Play Store, or at tyt.com/podcast.